to me, I just want to say, because I have this platform, Gomez Addams is queer. He's sexually fluid. There's no way. You're telling me that man who is that suave and that he's not sexual, that man is sexually fluid. I'm going to go ahead and say that they both have easily had thirds, and he is also a bi icon.
Oh, hey, Dani. It's so lovely to have you here on X-Ray Vision. How are you doing?
I'm doing good now that I get to see you.
Oh, it's so lovely to see you too. And I'm so excited to talk about your amazing comic book debut.
Yay. Thanks for supporting it. I saw you picked up a couple of issues. So
yeah, it's got to be done. I mean, we are living in a truly great time when we get to see our favorite superheroes openly celebrating queerness and celebrating pride, and to us as fans it means a lot. There are a lot of deep layered conversations to be had, but generally the fact you can go into a comic book shop, or a kid can go into a comic book shop and pick up an issue that says pride and read a ton of queer stories, that's just a great win. And it makes me so happy that you're involved in it.
I know, it's like wild. I've loved these two forever, and I feel like kind of came full circle with them. So to me, they're like the two most iconic queer characters in like DC history, aside from Wonder Woman, which I love and am excited hopefully to see more of her queerness, especially in live action. I'm gonna if you need a girlfriend,
let's manifest it. Everyone would love to see it. Dani, you can just be yourself. It's just Wonder Woman.
It's just Dani Fernandez.
So something that we always love to ask our guests when they kind of come on here is, what's your comic book origin story? What was the moment that you fell in love with comics?
Yeah, so mine, I would have to say, is comic adjacent, in that I fell in love with manga. Being obsessed with DBZ. I have it tattooed on me. It's just so iconic and has affected so much other anime and other manga artists and storytellers. And so it used to be really hard to get a hold of. I want to tell people this. It was either some little video store, an indie video store, and they would also have bootleg anime DVDs, and you could get some manga, or now there's a whole section at Barnes & Noble, but sometimes it would find its way over there. Dude. And you could find manga sometimes in Barnes & Noble, which was crazy.
The kids nowadays, they do not know the horror of having to get they would have vouchers in the back of magazines, and it would be you can send off for a VHS, and it's 3 episodes, it was $30, or you said, it's you got to find little places. I remember in Soho, in London, there was a old laundromat that was actually a manga bookseller, and most of it was in Japanese, so good luck, you can just enjoy the art. But also you'd occasionally find a couple of sub things that had been either subbed if it was anime or translated. And I'm really glad you picked that, because I actually think, in a world of big two superheroes and Western comics, people don't often think about manga as something that is the same, but actually manga is this incredibly storied old version of comics that way outdates Western comics, and has been so influential, and is also so influential on so many creators like you, and creators that we love, especially who are now making American comics.
Yeah,
so
I was gonna say, and also just big storytellers that are making big action movies. I know Jordan Peele has talked extensively, and I know friends that work for him that said in his office he had anime and stuff
he
in
actually he put the Akira slide into the International Nope trailer. So when I saw that, I was come on, that's iconic.
I know he said that, and then Taika, obviously, because he was signed on to do that, but Taika Waititi, and there's so many people who have been heavily influenced. And this is always my soapbox, is that a lot of people will say, well, that's super mainstream, let's say DBZ, which is one of the biggest anime of all time. like, oh, that's a real normie one. And it was like, okay, but this normie one, which by the way, again, was so hard to get a hold of. I know that everyone now sees it on Crunchyroll, and it was on Funimation and like Toonami, but like it used to be really hard to get a hold of here in the States. But this normie mainstream anime affected so many other anime and manga creators. And that's what they grew up with. So the people that are now our age that are creating it, they grew up with those. So yeah, to me, it's like, okay, it's mainstream. So is Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy.
Also, so like Superman and Batman. Like, we're living in an age where those are the most mainstream things ever. And I actually love how much more mainstream, like DBZ especially, has become, you know, with like record-breaking box office for releases.
Yeah.
Like that, it just makes it more accessible. It means more people can find these stories.
Yeah, and it's just exciting to see, because then it's like, okay, well, maybe you'll get a subscription to like Crunchyroll or something. Crunchyroll, pay me, because now I've said your name like 3 times.
Crunchyroll, please give Dani and also me a free subscription.
I've worked with Funimation. I don't know if I've done stuff with Crunchyroll. Maybe I have. There's a lot of changeover. But what was I going to say? Oh yeah, so maybe you subscribe to it because of My Hero Academia or whatever. But then you're finding, because there's a wealth of library in there. So then you're finding smaller ones that might be not as quote unquote mainstream, you know, and so that is a good way to get in it, you know. They say it's like a gateway anime, but I'm like, okay, well, it's a good way to find other lesser known ones.
I also think as well, like, it's a gateway for a reason. That's one of the few anime that, like you say, you could get a hold of, even if it was hard to get a hold of. That and Sailor Moon, that was
right,
your, like,
Sailor Moon,
those were your 2 big available ones, and that's why to so many of us they were such establishing kind of spaces and the place that we found that love. So I guess because Dani perfectly teased this at the beginning. It almost sounded like it was planned by not telling us who their DC story was about. So it's about Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy, the legends. So I would love to know, and what was your origin with them? When was the first time you found them and you realized that these were characters you cared about, or you felt represented by, or you just loved their kind of chaotic bisexuality?
Yeah. You know, I grew up watching Batman, the animated series. And so, I mean, I feel like we all did, but that was just so iconic, still like beautiful artwork. I feel like you could freeze any element of that show. And also segueing in the fact that Kevin Conroy, who is the voice of Batman, who was the voice of Batman for so many of us growing up, also has a story in this comic.
It is unbelievable. That is one of the bravest, coolest, most wonderful inclusions, and I thought DC did such a great job.
Yes, and so that's all to say, I first met them in animated form. That was my first introduction to them, and that kind of stayed. My love of them over the years also would be in movie form. I would say Uma. I will go to bat literally any day. Literally any day.
So many articles. I love that movie. It's a masterpiece, and Uma is... That has got to be one of the best supervillain castings of all time.
As a comic book writer, can we say it is one of the best adaptations of how a comic book feels?
Yep.
It's campy AF. If you've read a comic, especially 90s comics, they were so campy. The dialogue is so corny. You know, even going back to Adam West's Batman.
Exactly.
Corny.
It's the one that channels it the most. And I think that you can't, like Joel Schumacher, who made that movie, he's a gay icon, and he made a gay iconic movie. And I'm sorry if you've got a problem with that. I can't relate to it because I love Batman and Robin.
We got the nipples.
You got the nipples. You know, and you have Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's doing an incredible job. Like, he is being as quippy as any Batman supervillain should be. The costume designs are perfect. No, I feel you. And
it's also bright.
It's beautiful.
It's so colorful.
Yeah.
And when you watched it as a kid, it was like, these are my cartoons coming to life. This is the Batman that I know coming to life. This is the Poison Ivy. Like, this is my comic books coming to life. Also, I got to say, before I hop off this, because I know I'm supposed to be talking about HQ and Ivy, but George Clooney, to me, I think I tweeted this, the best Bruce Wayne.
He is a brilliant Bruce Wayne.
He's the most charming billionaire, because the city of Gotham trusts a billionaire, which side eye, but if you're going to trust anyone and you're going to be like, oh, well, he's the bachelor of our times, it's George Clooney. He's the most likable to me. I also love Keaton. I mean, I love all the Batman, but like Keaton is second, but I feel George Clooney is the best Bruce Wayne, philanthropist, like ladies man to me.
He's absolutely the most believable ladies man. Yeah. And I love him in that movie, so yeah, I love this, and I'm so happy to find out. This is another thing that we
I'm
share.
sorry.
Yes,
Uma, literally, I am posting, by the time this has come out, I have posted a Poison Ivy photo shoot that I did, and I used one of her quotes about tending, come join me and tend to my garden. So I'm all about it. I love her Poison Ivy.
In incredible news, we have been joined by Jason Concepcion, my incredible co-host, who was summoned by the mention of Batman and Robin.
Summoned by the nipples.
Nipples, 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 nipples on the bat suit. What a legendary thing that was. I know. What a legendary thing that was, that they had the nipples on the batsuit. It was beautiful. I agree. I was just listening in. George Clooney is a fantastic Bruce Wayne. Mm-hmm. So debonair and charming, and brought a level. Listen, Keaton was great. Val Kilmer, very good. Mm-hmm. But like, he brought a different level of like acting, maybe, because I don't know if he liked what he was doing, but he brought like a different energy to it that was really debonair and good.
I love that, and it's something I really liked about Robert Pattinson's Batman was how like grimy he was. That to me is like a realism Bruce Wayne. It's like he's like a Grebo who lives in a train station and can't go outside because he's dedicated his life to, avenging his parents and making Gotham a better place. But in the idealistic like comic book world of Batman and Robin, Bruce Wayne is charming, and you believe that these women want to throw themselves at him, and he's arguing with Robin over Poison Ivy like that. It's tonally just perfect, and I love that movie so much. I've talked about it on the podcast. I always say to people, just go and watch it because you will have fun. So I'm glad I have once again been supported.
Love it. Yeah, you'll have to do a bonus episode, have me on to just watch it, or like a watch along or something.
Yeah, we'll just do our own, it's our director's commentary. It's just us talking about it. So yeah, you've talked about how you came to know these characters and love them. So how did it come about that you were going to write them for this Pride issue?
Yeah, so I actually met with DC a couple years ago and told them that I wanted to write them, or like I said, Diana, who's another woman that's very near and dear to my heart. Oh, yeah. And then I just went off and wrote TV for a couple of years, mainly during the pandemic, all the last 3 shows I've written on have been Warner Brothers shows. This is a Warner Brothers property. I'm working on a Warner feature right now, so I feel like I'm just, me and Warner Brothers are just, I'm in the tower up there. So I just live up in the tower. And so they hit me up for this Pride. They wrote my manager and were like, we want Dani to write a Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy story. And I think it helps that I had the background I did, that I had been as vocal about loving them. Also, I know the guys over at Harley Quinn, the animated series. I've also worked with Charlie Adler. He directs and does voices in it. But anyways, that's all to say I've been in this wheelhouse. I've been in this family. I was on the Crisis Aftermath panels with Kevin Smith on the CW. So I've definitely been in the DC Warner Brothers family. But I was just over writing TV. And so I was very honored that they wanted me to write these 2 huge icons for this. And then I had to come up with a story, a short story, no less, which is like, I'm used to, at Netflix, I'm writing, like 60 pages, an hour-long drama. And so it's actually very difficult to write a short story because it's like, you got to get in and out, but can't be too quick. You can't take too long. You know, you have to have it resolved by the end. And I really just wanted them to have fun. Like, I know that we're going to be talking about queer stuff on here. And so, like, that was one of my biggest things is I want the ability to have the range where if you want to talk about things that are a little heavier or things that are really heavy or trauma or whatever, anyone that follows me on Twitter knows I talk about trauma a lot. But sometimes in my art, I don't want to. And I just wanted them to get to play. And so there is a little bit of a discussion of their past selves in this and some of the stuff that some of their deepest fears, I will say. But other than that, I really just wanted to see what I could do. In fact, when they asked me, that was the first thing I said was, what can I get away with? And Jessica Chen, my editor, was like, let's see. So she was very...
the dream answer.
Yeah, she's also a queer woman of color, and so it was great to work with her and just kind of I would send her stuff and ideas, and she would get really excited, and I would get really excited that she was excited. So we have some really beautiful scenes in the comic between the two of them.
Yeah, something that I was going to ask you about. One, Jess Chen is putting, like, if you look at the best DC comics coming out right now, Jess Chen's name is on them. So as soon as you said that was who you were with, I'm like, that makes sense. So you talk about like what you could get away with. Something you build in here is like there are elements of like rope bondage and like different kinds of knots that Ivy uses on Harley. Could you talk about that? Because it's very cool to see that in a DC comic. And Zoe Thorogood, the artist, does such a brilliant job of bringing it to life.
Yeah, so we wanted something that was like, if you know, you know. We kept calling it like a tip of the hat. We're like, and then the tip of the hat. And so it was like, if you're into BDSM or you would very clearly identify the type of knots and bondage or wrap. What I will say is she's wrapped in Harley is wrapped in vines from Ivy. But if you don't, it just looks like she's wrapped up. You know, she's caught in this trap. And so that to me is what I want it to be. You know, I want, if you're you're sexually active, you know, but you know, if you're not and you're giving this to your mom, although she might be too, you really don't know, then it's fine. She wouldn't know. She wouldn't know anything. And so that's kind of what I like playing with. Sometimes there was another scene that I had where I wrote Zoe if she can do a sweeping kiss like Morticia and Gomez, which is the end of Adam's Family, where they're in the doorway and he kind of is bending her over. And to me, I just want to say, because I have this platform, Gomez Adams is queer. He's sexually fluid. There's no way you're telling me that man who is that like suave and that he's not sexual. That man is sexually fluid. I'm gonna go ahead and say that they both have easily had thirds, and he is also a bi icon. So I basically, what's fun about getting to create art is taking from things that influenced you when you were growing up, of like, this scene is so iconic for me, can we take my characters and make this scene?
Apologies if you discussed this before, but Harl Ivy is one of the most beloved couples probably in DC, maybe in comics in general. What was it about them that drew you to this idea of doing a story?
I just love that I love that they're so unapologetically themselves, which is something the comics obviously are doing, but also I love seeing on HBO Max with the animated series, is that that's even so like funny. How they get to make fun of Batman. Because that's what they would do. And it's so funny. I'll make fun of Batman on Twitter, and of course people get mad. And I'm like, can't we have some fun at expense of the bat? Like, I'm always like, I'm with Harley.
He's a billionaire. Like, it's
I
fine.
Was like... Yeah, but I'm also like, so are you only going to bat for the bat? Like, or are you allowed to play as some of the other characters? And so I just love that they just don't care. Like, they just don't care about pleasing anyone else. And, you know, they're still figuring out their journey. You know, that they've been written by so many different creators now, and there's so many. It's great that my story can exist and another story can exist. There can be so many different tellings of them, and my favorite stories are the ones where they're figuring out their relationship with each other. Because I truly don't think anyone else really knows what it's like to be them than them, right? So that's why they have such a strong bond. And but what happens when your lover is your best friend and now you lose your best friend when you lose your lover? And that was a concern. I know when I got announced, I saw several fans that were like, oh, is she going to break them up? Because, you know, they got broken up by another bi woman. Which I was like, I was like, yeah, let me have them meet Dani Fernandez, like literally Dani. I'll just put myself in the comics. I'm like, I've already been animated. I'll just put myself in there
it's
and
Grant
just have
Morrison
an affair.
Animal Man style. You're just like the writer is in the book. No, I really love that. And like something I thought was really cool about this comic, which is out there now, so I'm going to say this because it's not telling the story, but it's an important point. Something that I really love is you have that challenge, you have that sauciness, you have that fun, but there's this big moment where like love is this most powerful thing and saying I love you. And that's really, it feels so warm and striking and in tone with him. So could you talk a little bit about that moment and why it was kind of so important?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are two women who rightfully have walls, have so much trauma, and rightfully might not haven't been exposed, I would say, to the unconditional love, love without conditions. And they get that in each other. And I think it's still, you know, when you've been burned so many times, I think we can all probably relate to this. When you have something that feels good, you sabotage it or you just question it. And so this story is kind of feeding into their worst fears about that, that I don't deserve. That's another thing. I mean, how many times has Harley her entire life heard that she doesn't deserve, that she's not worthy of love, you know, of being fully herself. And they can finally let their guards down. It's like, but are you going to? Is the other part of that, now that you finally can. And so I think their love for each other in that moment just kind of like triumphs over their fears. I actually have, I'm looking at it right now, I have a sign that says choose love, but I often tell myself choose love over fear. In so much of my life, like I had it as my wallpaper on my phone forever, just because it can be really easy to resort back to holding myself back or sabotaging or, you know, trauma-based things, which, like I said, rightfully, but it takes a lot of courage. It's like very brave to love and to catch feelings. To catch feelings is very brave.
What you talk about how these two characters have experienced a lot of trauma, come from trauma in a lot of ways. Something I think about a lot with comic book stories that are so rooted in, you know, origin stories that are often terrible, horrific events, etc. How do you balance talking about trauma in a way that isn't exploitive?
Yeah.
You know, like how do you walk that line? And do you have like a meter in your head that lets you know here's the kind of space that I want to work in when I'm talking about these kind of subjects through these characters?
Honestly, with them, well, to answer your question on like everything that I've worked on, it really just depends. Sometimes I pull in the trauma more just because I feel like the story calls for it. And to understand, I always say that it explains someone's actions. It doesn't excuse them. I know that we talk about that a lot in the mental health community. And so sometimes you need to know the trauma in the back. You need to see it to be like, why is this person acting this way? With them, though, if you're a DC reader, I feel you're pretty familiar with their trauma. Yes. You know?
You've heard of the Joker.
You're like, it's like Batman's parents being murdered.
Well aware.
Yeah. You've seen it. You know. You know. And so do you need to see that? I think instead I just put snippets of it. Again, it's just a short story. But in my other creations, in my other work, definitely I might dive in a little bit more. I just feel like I'm kind of moving away more and more. I feel, I feel the audience knows. That's one way. It's like treating the audience as if they've been through this, because I can imagine, even if you don't relate to, let's say, sexual trauma or relationship trauma, maybe parent trauma. And there's so many other Basically what I'm saying is that I don't always know if we need to see it.
Yeah.
Right.
But watch I come out with something and it's just like all over the place. And people are going to bring this up and I'm going to be like, oops.
So I was like, that kind of ties into something I was really interested to ask you about, which was like that balancing of like celebration and then like reality. You mentioned Kevin Conroy has a story in this issue, which is this incredibly moving autobiographical comic. And you grew up like we both did, like we all did with, Batman the Animated Series. So what's it like for your first published comic? One, to be with DC, like just starting at the top, and two, to be alongside, our generation's Batman.
It's very validating. I have to say it's very validating. Like, I'm so honored to write them, but I also just feel like I have been, you know me for a while now, I've been hustling. Rosie and I DM a lot because I'm always like, I was struggling to break into comics. I was struggling to break into TV. I've been, despite my years of training that I've had both as a writer and an actress, this industry is not easy to break into. And even when you break in, I was listening to Jensen Ackles' story about getting Soldier Boy, this a different franchise, but it was like he had to fight. He had to fight, even though he'd worked with Eric, he had to fight to get that role. And I remember some of my acting friends were like, are you, that's just, even at that level, they were like, that's exhausting. And so to have the validation of the years of work that I have put in, because I think if you're listening to it, you're like, oh, well, this was just handed to her. I was like, no. There's years, like I said, that I've worked at Warner Brothers. There was years that I was working with, like I said, with DC and hosting and having shows at Nerdist, talking to female creators. Like, I've been doing the work behind this. I sold a show to HBO Max. It's another Warner Brothers thing. So I've been behind the scenes writing scripts, submitting, auditioning, pitching again, selling things that you haven't even heard of or seen, having those dropped behind the scenes, being dropped from things, like picking myself up again and again and again and again. And so it gets to a point though where I love when things can just come in easier, like when it can just be like an offer. And that's what this was. And what that says to me is that I have made such a name for myself that they knew who I was, they knew my work, they knew the things I'd written for and been on, that they trusted me. So I think it was just validation of all the years of hard work that I've put in.
Pride this year really has me thinking about the particular cultural moment we are in, where it feels like, using the platform of anti-trans animus, all of a sudden, all the rights that have been won in recent years seem like everything's under threat. It seems like, homophobic language that was once commonplace, like in the 90s, is now just thrown around. Like, you go on the internet now, and it's just like everywhere with, the grooming discourse and this very toxic rhetoric aimed at LGBTQAI people. What does it mean to have a story in this year's DC Pride issue, and what does it mean? What does Pride mean in 2022? Because it feels like, this is just me speaking for me personally, I almost feel like I took it for granted. So I was wondering if you could just talk about how it feels to have this story this year, and what does it mean what does Pride mean in 2022?
Yeah, I really think that Pride for me in 2022, like being openly queer and even like wearing our flag, our rainbow flag, like feels like is an act of bravery. And I know I was in Greece right before the comic dropped, and I was I was staying at this hotel, and like I was staying there for a couple days, so I would see the manager and they're always like, oh, what are you wearing today? Because I was getting all dressed up. Like every time I would go out into the town, I'd always get dressed up. And then I came down in a rainbow gown, which I ended up wearing when I did a DC Pride signing, and his face changed. And it was so, I just didn't expect it. It just was like, oh, and then it was business as normal. Instead of like, oh, what are you doing? Where are you going? Like being really excited. It was just like, oh, nice to see you, you know? And I'm kind of like you where I was like, oh, I thought we were past that. I didn't. Also, I was going with my girlfriend, so I feel like they were like, these two clearly are together. Even people that know us because we were in all the photos together, they were like, are y'all together? I had no idea. And so they're just a couple of gals. We're friends, but it was just funny that we're traveling without men. We're traveling together. You know, we're living the high life in Greece. Now I sound like Uma. And I was so sad, you know, I had like built this like, oh, you know, like talking to the locals. And I want to say Mykonos, like that's also where I was, I remember turning to my friend. I'm like, there's so many gay bars here. There's so like, everyone's gay. And I was still caught off guard by their reaction. And I guess I haven't had to deal with that. You know, you think like, oh, I come out with this in Lubbock, you know, I'm going to get some looks, but I'm in WeHo or I'm in Mykonos. Like I don't expect anyone to treat me differently. And yet we are seeing that even in LA, you know, there's hate crimes happening in LA. So it was a kind of a gut punch, and I agree with you. I feel like I've been a little sheltered being in Hollywood, not from comments, I would say online, but just you know, you could be like half naked and whatever, like on the street, and no one's gonna look twice. But I forget that even where I grew up in Texas, it's still a battle. So, yeah.
How does it feel then to have this platform to tell this story that is joyful and about queer love and about two women who love each other and are badass and be putting that out in this space?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like I won.
Good.
I mean, getting paid to write queer stories. But I had a tweet that was like, the gay agenda is just keeping us alive. Like everyone keeps talking about the gay agenda and Disney and the gay agenda and DC and the gay agenda and Marvel. And I'm like, we just exist. And like, that's what I did with these two. They're not fucking talking about like, they're just existing as girlfriends. They're having a fight that they would have any type of defining the relationship type of thing that anyone goes through, whether you're queer or not. They're having a fight about it, you know, or they're you know, having some misconceptions and miscommunication. And so it's really difficult because there's a lot of talk about not queer baiting, you know, and not having just queer characters, but not showing anything behind the scenes, not showing them being queer. But then a large part of me is like, I just want them to exist and not be like, you know, well, it's the same thing I deal with Latinx stories, where it's like, I don't want to talk about deportation. You know, I just want you to go on a date and not talk about your parents like getting deported. But it's hard because I want the storytellers who do want to talk about that be able to, you know?
Yeah, I struggle with that as well in terms of, you know, like no one wants to your point, everybody wants to just tell a story about people in love, going about their day, living their life unafraid to walk around and be themselves. And at the same time, man, does it feel ever more important sometimes to highlight, hey, here are the dangers. Here are the bad things that happen. Here are the things people go through all the time when they are persecuted for loving a person. It's just, that's why I'm so glad that we have you on and we're talking about this story in this issue, because it just, you know, again, stuff that felt like I personally took it for granted, the progress that had been made over the last several years and decades, now feels like, man, all this stuff can go away. So now we have to like hustle backwards, talk about stuff that had seemed won a few years ago, and maybe even subjects that, you know, we felt like we were storytellers had moved past, and now it's time to tell those stories again. That's why I'm so happy that we have you on.
Well, one thing I do want to say, though, is I would just encourage any storytellers that come from a marginalized background, obviously, if you feel called to that story, 100% we need those stories. To me, I had to start checking myself of why, like when you said, oh, it's so important to educate. So I'm like, well, who am I writing this for?
Yeah.
Do my people need to see more trauma? I don't know. They know it. But is that a part of that story? Sure. That's why I want whoever's listening, there is no correct answer.
There's no correct answer.
It's just when you feel like, well, I need to speak on this because they need to be seeing it. Who is they?
Yeah.
But seriously, we talk a lot when we're talking about Black and brown trauma. When you're talking about that, it's like, do your own people need to see that? And maybe your answer at the time is yes. Maybe the answer at your time is no. I actually just want to focus on Black joy. I just want to focus on brown excellence. I just want to focus on, it's like, you should be allowed the range, though. I really want to say that. And so I had to start checking myself of like, why do I feel if I'm having an immigration story, who am I teaching this to, and why do I feel they need to see this? Is it for my people?
Yeah.
They're very aware of this. So who, and that's fine. But I think it's having that conversation of our responsibilities, our platforms, and what you actually want to do. Like when I look at how many white group of friends just dicking around, like I want to write a story about my dumbass friends in college dicking around.
Simply dicking around.
Just dicking around, sitting on people's faces, sticking their dicks in places, and like, just having fun. There's a lot of drama that comes with that. There's a lot of juiciness, that can come with that isn't necessarily related to hate crimes. And so this is going to sound like I'm against them. I'm not. I sold a show that was about trauma, that was about suicide. It was about my life. And so I definitely have written about trauma, but I also want the luxury of not even looking at that sometimes. So I'm glad that both can exist. And I really want marginalized groups to be able to have both exist.
Okay, I'm just because I want to know this. This is okay. I'm really glad. I'm really glad that we had you on, but like, talking about queer superheroes, talking about your space, your platform, the stories you want to tell. Who is like the superhero that you would most like to play?
Oh, gosh. I look the most, I feel like Jessica Cruz. So I like have fans do art and they've sent me art. This probably not like, I don't know how I look now, but there are definitely times in photo shoots where like we have the same jaw. So her, also another DC. Yeah, I think, I'm trying to think of other ones, but she's the one that comes to mind the most. So, and she's also a trauma survivor. Every superhero is a trauma survivor.
Literally all of them.
Every single one.
Literally, there's not every single one. There's not a single one that is not that. Which is honestly, a lot of what I love about the genre and fantasy stories and sci-fi stories, because it's a lot about finding power from traumatic events and taking ownership of that and repurposing that, under your own agency, taking those things that happen to you and making them your power. Yeah. Is just a very compelling idea that I think we all wish we could do as we move through life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That was very good, Jason. So have you watched Miss Marvel yet?
Mm-hmm.
And what are you feeling about it?
I loved it. I saw it at the premiere. They showed us 2 episodes. So those are I think I'm caught up now with everybody.
Yeah, you're caught up.
Gosh, it is so refreshing.
Yes.
And I love the fact that it feels different than any of the other properties. It honestly, the risks that they took in incorporating animation and things like that, and the editing, which I want to shout out to the editors, and don't always get as much love, but like editing, the directing, like the writing, all of it, the acting, top notch. it reminded me kind of what Marvel / Sony is doing over in the Spider-Verse with getting to play with Miles Morales and like different types of animation and pulling, we saw a little bit of that in Doctor Strange as well, like when they were going through the different universes. But I just love that. Like take risks, have fun, do something different than what we're seeing. And I really feel like they're doing that. They have a lot of social commentary, that they had in the comic that has stayed, and possibly more, they might possibly even have more. And I think that's so necessary. And I think that's really cool. I think it's really cool that Disney is having them do that. And I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
We loved it so much. And I love those aspects, like the way they build comics art and cartooning and all that kind of stuff into the production design is so inventive and fun. I actually wrote a piece recently where I was like, she's definitely the MCU's first like fully fledged cartoonist, but I had to shout out Miles because that was the experimental space that made a young superhero an artist. And, that's so key. And I love that because in the comics, they're friends. So I imagine that if they ever meet in the MCU, they'll be like making a jam comic together or something, or like doing a mural.
So cute.
Yeah. And our other big show that we're talking about a lot is Obi-Wan. And I know you are a Star Wars lover. So have you been watching Obi-Wan?
Yes, our friend Christina Ariel is in it.
Yes. Yeah. I couldn't believe it. She kept that one on the D-Lo as well.
That girl's got a lot of secrets. Yeah, she's a NDA. So she's in it. Moses is obviously amazing. And I'm really excited for this next chapter in Star Wars. I'm super excited for Andor as well. And just like at Celebration, I was on a panel about Latinos in space, and I'm just like, we are taking over. I was excited about Rosario as leads. So but I same thing. I'm curious to see what else they have up their sleeve.
Yeah.
So
it's very exciting time if you love this stuff. Tiring time. It's a lot of TV at all times, but it's really exciting. Dani, thank you so much for coming on X-Ray Vision and talking to us about all this amazing stuff.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was such a joy. And where can people find you and what do you have to plug? Just tell us everything.
I'm at Ms. Dani Fernandez. It's MSDaniFernandez, and pick up DC Pride 2022. Got my girls in it. Also, our friend Stephanie Williams, she did Nubia.
Yes.
And she has a new Nubia comic out, but you get to see them wrestling. So
Hello.
Yeah, so she was also like, what can I do? I bet. We're just pushing our hot girl agenda. That's all. That's the agenda. It's just hot girl. So
Dani, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.